This is Algebra 1, Unit 8, Lesson 6, the zeros of a quadratic. So what we're going to be talking about is looking at the x locations on any function where the y coordinate is equal to 0. Where are we looking? For the y's to equal 0, we are looking where it crosses the x-axis. So we're looking for where the parabolas are going to cross the x-axis. So that's when y equals 0. Okay, so they're called the zeros of the function because y equals 0. So we can find them using factoring, which we're going to be looking at in just a minute. All right, so let's take a look at the quadratic function, y equals x squared minus 2x minus 3. It's shown on the graph here. Now, we are looking for the zeros of the function, which is the x-intercepts. All right, how many x-intercepts does this have? It has 2. What are the x-intercepts? Well, one is right there. It would be x equals -1. The other one would be at x equals 3. Okay, now how do we know that these are zeros? All right, so if we plug this into the original equation, y equals, if I plug in x equals 3, the positive 0, and plug it into the original function, this is going to be 3 squared minus 2 times 3 minus 3, which is 9 minus 6 minus 3, which does equal 0. So you can see that the zeros of the function is where it crosses the x-axis. When you plug in the x, the y is going to equal 0. Okay, so now let's factor the expression x squared minus 2x minus 3. We can do double bubbles, or we can do the box. I'll do both. All right, if I do the box, this is x squared, this is -3. We know this has to be x times x to give me x squared. All right, what are the factors of 3 that will add up to -3 will add up to 2? Watch your signs. It would have to be -3 and +1. So that gives me 1x, -3x. Add these two together, they give me -2. So my factors are going to be x minus 3 and x plus 1. Okay, now remember, what did we say our zeros were? Well, we said the zeros is x equals 3 and this x equals -1. Well, if we take each one of these factors and set them equal to 0, x minus 3 equals 0, x plus 1 equals 0. And I solve this, this will give me the zeros. So I'm going to add the 3. I get x equals 3. There's my first 0. Subtract 1, x equals -1. There's my other 0. So when you factor an expression, quadratic, and set it equal to 0, you can find where the zeros of the function are. So take each bubble, set it equal to 0, and solve. All right, so based on what we just did, determine where the zeros of y equals x squared plus 3x minus 10 are algebraically. Okay, so if we're looking for the zeros, we know the y is going to equal 0, so we take this equation, x squared plus 3x minus 10, and we set it equal to 0. Now we want to factor this. So do your box or your bubbles. I'll do both. This is x squared. So we know this has to be x times x. -10 goes down here. All right, we need the factors of -10 that give you 3. All right, what multiplies give you 10? Well, it'll be 5 and 2. So to get the signs right, this would have to be x plus 5, x minus 2. So this is going to be 5x minus 2x. Add these together, that gives me the 3. So this is going to be x plus 5, x minus 2 is equal to 0. Set them equal to 0. And then solve each one. So subtract the 5 here. This gives me x equals -5. Add the 2 here. And that gives me x equals 2. So that tells me if I were to graph this, y equals x squared plus 3x minus 10, it's going to cross the x-axis at -5 and +2. Let's verify that. All right, so y equals, let me clear these out, x squared plus 3x minus 10. And if I graph this, there's the 2, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, -5. I look at my table. Back to 0 here. Here's my table. If I go to -5, my y is equal to 0, and when x is 2, y is equal to 0. You can also do this on Desmos. You can look at the values there to verify that as well. Okay, so that is how you solve a quadratic equation to find the zeros. We use what is called the zero product law. All right, so what the zero product law is, it tells you how to solve quadratics or any other factors. The zero product law says if two or more quantities have a product of 0. So when you have two bubbles multiplied equal to 0, that means at least one of them has to be equal to 0 because 0 times something is 0. So if this one's 0 times whatever this is will give you 0, and whatever this is going to give you 0. So what we do to do that is we figure out what makes each of the bubbles 0. To do that, we set each bubble equal to 0. So this is already factored, so we take x plus 7, set it equal to 0. X minus 2 is equal to 0. Solve this for x, and we get x is equal to negative 7. There's my first bubble. So if this is negative 7, that's going to make this bubble 0 times this is going to make it 0. All right, x minus 2 equals 0. Add 2. X is going to equal 2. So there's my two bubbles. Okay, now this works for any kind of bubbles that you have. All you have to do is take each factor and set them equal to 0. 2x minus 1 equals 0. 3x plus 4 is equal to 0. All right, let's solve this for x. Add 1. 2x is equal to 1. Divide by 2. And x is equal to 1/2. Nobody said you couldn't have a fraction. A fraction's perfectly fine. If I plugged in a half here, 2 times a half is 1 minus 1 is 0. So that gives me the 0 for that one. This one, 3x plus 4 is equal to 0. Subtract the 4. And then divide by 3. And we get x equals negative 4/3. Okay, so there's my 0. So the zero product law basically says when you factor a quadratic, take each bubble, set it equal to 0 to find the zeros of the quadratic. Okay, so the zero product law is remarkable because it allows us to solve equations with an x squared or higher level term in it as long as these expressions set equal to 0 can be factored. So basically, you can factor it and set the factors equal to 0, you can find the zeros. Okay, so find the roots. Roots or solutions is another way of saying zeros. So if it says find the roots, find the zeros, or find the solutions, basically means do all the same thing. So we're going to solve each of these using the zero product law. Sometimes you'll be instructed to solve by factoring. Okay, so it means the same thing. Either way that you do this, you have to factor. So we have x squared plus 4x minus 12. Okay, do my box, x squared minus 12. This is going to be x and x. All right, factors of 12 that give me 4. Well, that would be 6 and 2, but I got to get my signs right. I need this to be plus 4. So that would have to be plus 6 and minus 2 to give me 4. So that gives me 6x and minus 2x to give me the 4. That's an x. So my two bubbles are going to be x plus 6. X minus 2 is equal to 0. Okay, don't skip this step. Set each bubble equal to 0. And solve for x. And x is going to equal negative 6. And x is going to add 2. X is going to equal 2. So there's my two bubbles. Okay, let's try the next one. 2x squared minus 14x equals 0. All right, before we start, do you notice anything interesting about these numbers? Yeah, they divide by 2. So let's divide by 2. Now, I can't just divide by 2 on one side. I've got to do the other side as well. So divide everything by 2, and that gives me x squared minus 7x is equal to 0. Okay, is this a box one? No, it isn't because it doesn't have the c term. It only has the a and the b term. So we have to factor out the x on this. This is going to be a GCF. X times x minus 7 is going to equal 0. All right, now remember there's two factors here. One factor is going to be x equals 0. The other one's going to be x minus 7 equals 0. X equals 0 is an answer. You can have 0 as a 0. All right, and then the other one, add the 7, and you get x equals 7. So there's your two zeros. Okay, let's see if we remember our next pattern. What about x squared minus 25 is equal to 0? What's special about x squared minus 25? They're perfect squares. Do you remember the factors for perfect squares? They are identical factors except for the sign. So this is going to be x and x. to get 25, you have to do 5 times 5, but to be negative 25, 1 has to be plus, 1 has to be minus. And remember, the middle term is going to drop out because this is going to have to 0 in the middle. So x plus 5x minus 5, set each factor equal to 0, and solve for x. This is going to be x equals negative 5, and this one is going to be x equals positive 5. There we go. Okay, let's try this last one. 2x squared plus 5x minus 12 equals 0. Can we divide by 2 on this one? No, because the 5 doesn't divide by 2. So we have to do our box, but this is the little more complicated box. Okay, so remember, when you have a bigger coefficient, 2x squared, and the negative 12 down here, you have to multiply these together to get your other two boxes. So it's going to be negative 24x squared. Okay, now we need the factors of negative 24 that add up to be 5. All right, well, you can use your calculator. Y equals negative 24 divided by x. And if you remember the other trick here, it's x plus negative 24 divided by x. And if we look in our columns here, if we look in the red column, we want to find the column that adds up to be 5. So that's going to be negative 3 and positive 8. Or if you don't have your calculator, you can just do division on Desmos. So this is going to be 8x, negative 3x. Put those in the boxes, and then do the GCF of each row and column. So between 2x squared and 3x, your GCF is x. Between 2x squared and 8x, your GCF is 2x. All right, now between negative 3x and negative 12, what's your GCF? Well, they're both negative, so it's going to be negative, and then 3 goes into both of these. That means between 8x and negative 12, 8 and 12 will go into 4. 3 times 4 is 12. So your factors are going to be 2x minus 3, x plus 4 is equal to 0. Set each factor equal to 0, and solve. Now remember, when you have a leading coefficient that's greater than 1, it's not unusual to have one of your factors be a fraction. That's okay. This is 3 over 2 or 1.5. Either one of those is fine. I just leave it as the fraction. It's fine. The other one's going to be x equals negative 4. So this is all stuff that we've done before. I mean, it's nothing new. All we're doing is setting each factor equal to 0 to solve. Okay, for the last one, we're going to find the zeros of the quadratic. Y equals 3x squared minus 6x minus 24 algebraically. Algebraically means we set the factor equal to 0. Y is equal to 0. 6x minus 24 is equal to 0. Okay, now before we start, do we notice anything about these numbers? Yeah, let's make them smaller. So we're going to divide everything by 3. If you can divide by something out, do it. Makes your numbers smaller, makes the numbers easy to work with. Minus 2x minus 8 is equal to 0. Okay, now we want a factor. To find our zeros, we have x squared, negative 8. All right, we know this has to be x and x. Here's my two bubbles. We know this has to be x times x. The factors of negative 8 that give me negative 2 would be negative 4 and positive 2. So that gives me 2x and negative 4x. All right, because that'll add up to negative 2x in the middle. So this is x minus 4, x plus 2. Set the factors equal to 0 and solve. So we add 4 here. X is going to equal 4. This one is going to be subtract the 2. X is going to equal negative 2. So that means my zeros, one is going to be at negative 2, which is right there. The other one's going to be at 4, which is right here. Okay, now let's see if we're right. I already put this in my calculator. Whoops, y equals 3x squared minus 6x minus 24 using the window that was given. And if I graph this, look at that. Negative 2, positive 4. There's my two zeros. If I look at my table, just to verify that, negative 2 is 0, 4 is 0. You can see it both ways. So if I were to draw this parabola in, it goes down like this, and then comes back up and goes through 4. Pretend I can draw a nice neat curve, and there is my parabola. Now, you can see where the zeros are. The 0 is here, the 0 is there. We can find it by factoring, and then when we sketch it, the parabola goes right through that. Okay, now just for argument's sake, do you know what this point right here is without using the calculator?